Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
And today we're going to do a quick recap of the Supreme Court term.
Yes.
And there's some big consequential decisions this year. Yes.
You are a court watcher.
A little bit.
Like you go online, you read the decisions, you get in there.
I do like to read some of the decisions. I particularly like, you know,
you even listen to the live feed.
I do sometimes.
Yes.
Yes.
You are a dedicated court guy.
I was a big fan of reading Scalia because he just had such a sharp pen.
Yes.
He was not only a great writer, but very witty and got right to the point and really knew how to turn a phrase.
Yes. Yes, he did. And he did so on the bench as well.
Yes, he did.
Like you never really, as a practicing attorney before the court, getting, Scalia would always just kind of jump in really quick.
Yeah,
though, too.
Right to it.
Yeah, he wouldn't allow this dither-dather of opening statements like they do today. So cordial, so nice.
No. And it's interesting because
the Socratic method was practiced.
Clarence Thomas was on the court for a couple decades.
Didn't say a word.
Didn't say anything.
Didn't ask a question.
Never asked a question. Never.
And now
But Scalia, after Scalia passed, it started to. Clarence Thomas kind of, and I think it's in part because Clarence Thomas has filled that Scalia position. On the court.
Well, philosophically, he's definitely the heir to that.
Yeah.
To the Scalia mantra, and which is why the left hates him so much.
Yes.
And has hated him. I mean, our own president just despises him.
Yeah.
Despised him during his confirmation.
Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is go back and look at the confirmation hearings.
Yeah.
So
smiling Joe Biden gleaming at Clarence Thomas
during the high-tech lynching.
Yep.
So
which is exactly what it was.
This term of court could, there was a lot of Trump-related stuff.
Yeah. And
the most important one was this question about immunity.
Yes.
And so they ruled that presidents are immune to things that they do as official acts while president. Well, okay. That makes some sense because, one of the things that we talked about before this decision was if you didn't have immunity, you could go back and try, there would be George Bush or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, and, for doing things that, Obama killed a citizen of the United States who was associated with terrorism.
Yeah, I think despite the Democrats' bluster on this issue with regard of how it affects the current lawfare against Donald Trump, which is imploding, and rightfully so, you have to think those other living presidents like Bill Clinton and like Barack Obama were like, yes.
And George Bush.
But the Democrats specifically were like, yes.
Right, the Democrats, right.
Yay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because, and if
Donald Trump's evil, but yes.
If Trump wasn't in the picture, this would have been just kind of like.
It would have been a nothing burger.
Well, obviously.
It was interesting to hear people on the right who didn't think that they would rule this way, but I always thought this is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
This is an absolute no-brainer. And John Roberts wrote the opinion, which made it even more hard-hitting.
Right. Well, and it was. I was disappointed that this was a 6-3 decision.
It should have been.
It should have been a 9-0.
Yeah, it should have been 9-0 for sure.
I mean, it was.
And Sotomayor's dissent was. It was nonsensical.
Yeah.
I did read that. It was nonsensical.
Well.
I don't
know if we haven't talked about this on the podcast, but there's a letter from Lawrence Tribe.
Oh yeah,
who was, he'd been a longtime law professor at Harvard.
Yeah, Harvard.
He was one of Barack Obama's instructors, mentors, that kind of thing. Wrote a letter to Barack saying, the Supreme Court is full of people who have exceptional intellect, and appointing Sotomayor would diminish the Supreme Court's intellect.
I don't think I knew
This came
that.
from Lawrence Tribe.
I don't think I knew that.
It is a letter written to Barack Obama. Yeah. Anyway,
Well, I think she continues to show that.
yeah. So, and you know, the court got it right because earlier in the term, they had this emergency deal with the Colorado case about removing Trump from the ballot. And that was a 9-0 decision.
Yeah.
And so this immunity thing, I kind of thought, well, it should be a 9-0.
It makes
there's-
no sense that the other three dissented in the way they did, and the nonsense. And in fact, John Roberts, in his lead opinion, called them to account, which you normally don't hear. The very strong wording that he chose to use, calling them to account for their blustering dissent, which he called nonsensical.
Yeah.
Because you have to give presidents immunity for their official acts.
Right.
And then they sloughed it down to the lower court to decide what, in terms of the Trump case, what were official, what were non-official.
Right.
But nothing's going to happen before the election.
Right.
And then it just dies in the darkness.
Probably. Yeah. So that was
Despite the Washington
that was
Post.
the quite consequential decision, but one that was, I feel like, a little bit obvious. The one that I think is going to have the most impact on everyday lives of Americans going forward is the repeal of the Chevron doctrine.
Yeah, so walk our listeners through what Chevron was.
So Chevron was a decision that was made back in 1984.
Yeah.
And
That's how long it's been around.
yeah. So it was Chevron versus, let me see, what was the case? The Natural Resources Defense Council.
Yeah.
Now, this was, at the time when the court made this decision, what was happening was that the EPA was interpreting Clean Air Act stuff in a way that was beneficial to the oil industry because Reagan, EPA, and so Natural Resource Defense Council sues Chevron, blah blah blah. The court says, this is okay, that the way the EPA is interpreting this, because it wasn't explicitly written into law, we have to kind of go with what their interpretation is, as long as it's reasonable. And
as long as it's reasonable. That was the deciding language.
And
long as it's reasonable.
What's fascinating,
which is such an arbitrary term.
Yeah, what's fascinating is at the time that this decision came out, conservatives were like, yes.
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 Because it benefited them.
Right.
And the EPA had some pretty large handcuffs under the Reagan administration at that time.
Yes.
If memory serves, it was so long ago. But an enjoyable time. For
definitely has shifted. Now, it's been one of the most cited cases in federal jurisprudence.
Yeah.
18,000 citations to Chevron since then.
Yeah, it created a several decade deference to the administrative state.
Exactly.
And a growth of that administrative state because of that deference.
Right. And so...
And it basically gave Congress the ability to do nothing.
Well, exactly. It took Congress, it basically, because Congress was like, oh, this is really hard. We don't want to work this hard.
This work
this hard.
This work is hard.
I don't want to have to think about that.
It's hard being a congressman.
And so let me explain to people who don't follow the legislative process on a regular basis, like I did for many years.
It's a little different than Schoolhouse Rock.
Yes, but Congress will come up with an idea. They'll write a bill, and invariably, because they either don't want to do the work or they don't want to do the negotiation, they don't want to do the compromise, they don't tell the executive branch this is the way it should be implemented.
Yes.
They say the agency can implement it as they see fit.
Yeah, and allows unelected bureaucrats to basically run roughshod over your lives.
Yes, because
over all of our lives.
It's
and
basically,
and this is a nonpartisan issue.
Keep in mind,
you can poke holes at whatever.
It is nonpartisan. But keep in mind
unless you love the deep state.
Under our function of government, our structure of government, Congress makes the law. The executive branch enforces the law.
Yeah.
The judicial branch determines,
interprets
the law. Okay? So what Congress has done for 40 years, and maybe even longer, is basically said, we don't like this legislating thing. We don't want to make the law. We'll give you the contours.
We don't even want to come up with a budget.
You, executive branch, you should make the law.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court under this decision has said, wrong, Congress, do your job.
Yeah.
And so what was very interesting to me is to see liberals, the leftist progressives, criticize the court, saying, oh, they are, because of the immunity thing and then the Chevron decision, they said that they are giving more executive power to the president. And I was like, no. Chevron is exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
It is taking power away from the
wasn't it
executive.
Lawrence Tribe who made a pronouncement? It said the administrative state is essentially dead.
Yeah.
I think it was Lawrence Tribe. I think I read that.
It might have been.
That he made this pronouncement that this is going to impact the administrative state in ways that it's going to set it back 40, 50 years. Oh, my goodness.
Which it should. But what it means for Congress, and this is where the congressmen and congresswomen probably haven't really absorbed this, that their job is going to be more difficult.
Yeah.
Because we're going to have to write into law what they want to actually have the law do.
Yeah.
Not leave it up to interpretation. And that's the way it should be.
Or blind implementation.
That's the way it should be. It should not be unelected bureaucrats creating laws. It was never the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the good things is, in my mind, is it gives us that now that the Supreme Court has said, oh, no, you can't do that. Well, we don't need as many federal employees as what we have. Because guess what? We don't need all those lawyers and all those people who are like, oh, we're going to create laws. Nope, you're not.
Or create these rules that have nothing to do with anything Congress has given them the authority to do.
Right.
How much of that has taken place over the last 40 years?
Exactly.
Just the EPA is notorious for making rules out of whole cloth.
Well, I mean,
and then Congress has to act, or it's fought out in the legal system. There's something like waters of the United States.
Yeah.
Where that would govern, the wash on your property.
Exactly. Here in a desert.
Here in a desert.
Your wash is now a U.S. waterway.
Yes. If you want to, this is a perfect example of what we're talking about. If you have a little wash or tributary going through your property and you want to do something to your property, like expand your house or do something else, the EPA wants to have regulatory authority over something as simple as that. Or if you're just next to a canal and you're a business and you want to do something with your business or expand your business, the EPA wants to have regulatory authority over your business because you're next to a canal or next to a small tributary. It's insane.
Yeah. So the Chevron
and it's made up. It's totally made up out of whole cloth.
Yeah. So the Chevron decision is
Congress has never ruled on something.
Major issue. It's going to be for the benefit of the American people for decades to come.
Yeah.
Just no doubt. Now, there was another case. This is the same day that the Chevron overturned.
Well, those were later they were in the last week of the term, which is always when the fun stuff happens.
There was a case called the Securities and Exchange Commission versus Jarkessi. And this is the court ruled that the SEC cannot use in-house proceedings without a jury to impose fines in a securities fraud case. So a lot of what was happening was that they would get these securities fraud cases, and then there would be no trial.
Yeah.
They would just say, we're finding you guilty, and here's your fine. And the courts were like, well, wait a minute. You got to have a jury involved. I mean, that's a fundamental right in the Bill of Rights, right? And so that is going to have some real impact. Ronald Mann wrote, it's likely to have a far-reaching impact on dozens of federal administrative agencies that use a similar process.
Yeah. Just arbitrary, you're guilty, here's the fine.
Right. And so this shows you get your day in court.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you should.
And you absolutely should. That's the way our system works.
Exactly.
I mean, what's interesting about this is you're highlighting the two biggest agencies that run roughshod over individual rights in this country.
What, you mean the EPA and
the EPA and the SEC?
You're right.
You want to talk about unelected bureaucrats who think they have all the power in the world. And now they've gotten beautiful golden handcuffs.
And it just so happens there's a third
platinum
case.
haircuffs.
There's a third case that the Supreme Court ruled on this term.
Yeah.
Also dealing with the EPA. This was Ohio versus EPA. And the court granted a request by 3 states and some private companies and trade groups to put a rule issued by the EPA on hold while they challenge it in the federal appeals court. Because what happened was the EPA had ruled on this good neighbor provision that these 23 states, had to follow these, but they only had like 6 states that joined. And so the other states were like, well, wait a minute, this was based on all of these states engaging. It's a little bit nuanced, but the point is
it's a federalism issue.
Yeah, that basically the bureaucracy can't force states and private entities into compliance on issues that they haven't litigated.
Didn't that have to do with like something like California implements something and then all these other states kind of have to follow? Am I following that correctly?
It was a little different.
It's a little bit different than that.
Yeah, that one. That's going to get. There's going to be more challenge on that because what happens is many states just follow California's lead
because they're
but that hasn't been
clueless.
challenged
Yeah.
to the Supreme Court yet. So anyway,
and yet, despite these great rulings, I mean, there's been outcry from the Democrats that this was a MAGA court, and yet 43% of the rulings were unanimous.
Yeah.
Unanimous.
Well, and
were some mixed rulings too.
Yes.
With conservatives siding with liberals, and
in this case,
vice versa.
Amy Coney Barrett sided with the Democrats.
Yes,
it was a 5-4 decision. It was not a 6-3 decision.
Yeah, and
then there was other examples of cases where, you had Kavanaugh. It's a very interesting mix. This is an ideologically 6-3 court, but it's not blanket ideology.
No, and John Roberts, I think, gets a bad rap, because of he didn't kill Obamacare and some things like some rulings that went against conservatives. But I think his thinking that trying to have a cohesive court in terms of its rulings, having not just nuanced rulings, but good decisions, strong decisions coming out of the court is a good thing for the country.
Yeah.
It's not a politicized
He's
court
done a very
overall.
good job as the Chief Justice in a very politicized time.
Oh, completely.
Keep in mind that but for Kirsten Sinema, we would have 13 justices?
15.
I don't know how many. They wanted to pack the court. I don't know how many they wanted to expand the Supreme Court. It is perilous times, and he's done a great job of guiding them through this.
Yeah.
So
AOC, our friend Sandy Cortez, has issued a bill to impeach Alito and Clarence Thomas.
Did you see my eye roll?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good grief.
Because of these decisions.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Because they're ethically compromised.
She's ethically compromised.
Yeah, it's Manchurian candidate, just like our president.
Yeah. All righty. Well, I'm sure we'll have. We probably
it was a good court session.
Yeah,
I think,
and maybe we should have an actual legal expert on.
Oh, that would be great.
Show.
We
kind
should
of recap some of these things and then kind of see, look out over the horizon what's coming next.
Yeah. You know where the highest court of the land is?
Denver?
No. The highest court of the land is the basketball court above the chambers of the Supreme Court.
Oh, okay.
That's a big joke.
Nice.
And to be sure, despite what you see or read, in the mainstream media, there is a genuine love and respect amongst the justices.
Yeah.
And for each other, there's deep friendships. when I used to do our YPO Inside Washington program, we would go to the Supreme Court and we would meet with not the Solicitor General, the Sergeant of Arms, or the person who brings all the cases to, before the justices, and they sort them all out, and he would talk about how different justices and how they would interact and how friendly they were about different things, and have spirited, debates about each and every case. But it takes 4 justices to move the case forward, and then they would move on, and that would be it. If anything, the leaks that have happened over the last year, especially with Roe v. Wade, has created more tensions.
Yeah. Well,
but it's still the best system in the world.
That's exactly right. And for that, we're grateful.
We are grateful. All right. God bless.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening.